9 o'clock rolled around really quickly this morning. How is everyone?
Doing good, thanks.
Good. Looks like we're still waiting for a couple people, so I'm going to pause the recording, and if someone would be so kind as to remind me when we get started again to unpause it, that'd be great. Thanks. I'm recording. Okay. So I wanted to just mention that we have a couple DD staff on the line this morning who haven't joined us before. So Barb Hemmelman and Tyler Evans are on the line. Barb is working on the significant change request process with that work group, and that work's been going on for a few months, and hopefully we'll be wrapping up soon. And Tyler Evans started in, was it January, Tyler?
Tyler's having audio issues, but yeah,
okay.
that is accurate.
Okay, so Tyler's been with our office since about January, and since Katie Kelly is going to miss the next few meetings, he is joining as kind of another set of ears and eyes to help us with this work. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Can everyone see the agenda okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so today, Jays, I hope you noticed I put you down for the follow up on the actions. If you didn't, I can handle that.
Oh, yes.
Okay. And then we will focus our attention today on the significant change request section and the discharge termination section. And then we will wrap up as we usually do with just knowing what we're expected to do before we meet again in 2 weeks. Did it work for everyone for me to just send the attachments and update the calendar invite? Were you guys able to find what you needed? Okay. All right. So, Jays, do you feel like you have what you need or can give that update, or do you need some support with that this morning? I apologize for that.
I'm trying to decipher exactly what you meant. So I might need some help with the first two.
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to share a different document. So I attached, I put in a Word document and attached to the meeting invite an updated schedule for our meetings. And essentially it pushed our work out a couple weeks. But what I've done, excuse me, I can't clear my throat, is I've inserted in the beginning of June and in the beginning of July a couple updates for point of entry and some additional time for us to focus on that after our conversation during our last meeting. And then in the beginning of August, just, as DDD is kind of fleshing out what that means with our intake specialist, and those policies and procedures start to firm up, providing some updates and visiting with the group about what that looks like moving forward and kind of what it looks like from current until that kind of vision is established, or whereas comes to fruition, maybe I should say. So that pushes our work generally out to August 18th. So like I said, I think we were originally planning to wrap up on August 4th. So it adds a couple additional meetings to our schedule. Any thoughts or feedback on that?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. And then the other part, Jays, is just the updates that I made to the actual roles and responsibilities document. So let me pull that up quick. So I will scroll up to that point of entry section. Did everyone have a chance to take a look at that? It got longer, that's for sure. So any thoughts on the changes that were made? Any questions, any clarifications or edits you see that are necessary. I know one of the comments when we talked about this was that the order in which things happen was a little jumbled. So does it look more in line with how things are happening?
This is Sharon. I think so. And until we use it a few times, we may think differently. But, you know, for now, I think it looks good.
Okay. Oh, sorry, did I interrupt someone? The one part I wasn't sure about and wanted, I guess, some confirmation from the group is this piece under the case management column, we have this where there's kind of that interim within the 30 days. Something is put together so DSPs and they know what to be doing, and some of that planning occurs so people can get settled. And then there are these correlating points over under the CSP column.
We've never had a case manager write the initial supports.
So what happens in those first 30 days while you're doing assessments and getting to know a person? So if a person's moved in, what is the baseline for how staff know to interact, or is there anything, or is it just kind of we're getting to know you and figuring it
We're
out?
writing that on the CSP side.
Okay.
We have some pre-enrollment assessments, and we develop a plan based off of that on the CSP side. The case manager has never even assisted with that, although they'll come to the pre-enrollment meeting to learn the information that we know, but they're not usually too involved in identifying what the supports are needed.
We do similar.
And that may be different in other places. I don't know.
Ours looks somewhat similar. If you have someone who's coming from another CSP, you have their plan that they already have that will give you some idea of how to support them. If it's a completely new admission, we just clarify the time alone, those safety, the risk. We go through the risk stuff, and then we just spend those 30 days doing assessments. And we do a T-log for the first 30 days so that everyone can watch as it unfolds, and then we develop a plan. If you go in and do an ISP plan, case management might know this, if you go in and do an initial plan in their app, can you do another one in 30 days? I suppose you'd be updating it and then.
Yeah, they can. It just depends on what they list for the start and end date.
Yep.
Of the ISP.
Yeah, and knowing that, we want to be mindful of the time and energy we're spending in that first 30 days while we get to know a person. But the reason I put this in here, and we can change it in whatever way makes sense, and aligns kind of with those responsibilities, and we want to be functional. I just wanted to kind of have the discussion about what is happening and how do staff know what to do when somebody is brand new. Because, you guys are supporting people sometimes with really significant mental health supports or behavioral needs or medical needs. So just wanted to kind of learn more about what that baseline looks like. Is what Amy, and I have kind of a smaller screen, so I'm didn't catch who the next person to speak was, but is that similar at other CSPs?
What, I would be curious, oh, go ahead, Arlette.
I was gonna say, we don't have like a pre-assessment that we do, but when people come in, we try to have those, I guess we don't necessarily call them pre-enrollment meetings, but that's kind of what we are doing, just to get to know the person and trying to figure out what supports they're currently getting to continue while we're doing our assessment. So it's nothing, there's nothing really written down at that point before that 30-day ISP meeting.
Okay.
I would be curious, a case manager's perspective, like how would you write a plan for someone that you don't know? I would think that would be horrible.
So I think there's some confusion sometimes. So oftentimes there's a meeting that there's an intake meeting, and then there's a 30-day meeting. Is that accurate? Like, that's what I've heard.
That's what we do.
So the intake meeting is really the CSP kind of saying what supports they're able to provide, and that based on what we're learning, this is what they're, considering providing. And that's the conversation. And then the 30-day meeting happens later, that where the team, then we put in goals in place and stuff like that. And usually that's close to the end of the 30 days. It's not in the beginning. And so that's what I just wanted to clarify that, because there's 2 meetings that is actually occurring most of the time that I'm aware of.
Right. Okay. Well, I will,
We have 3 meetings at Lifescape. We do a pre-enrollment because at Lifescape, I've developed an admissions checklist for our internal program coordinators. So they're writing programs and stuff. We have certain templates that we have programs for everybody. So those are getting put in place. So we essentially have the whole plan minus the goals when the person enrolls. So we have the pre-enrollment, which we invite the case manager to. At the pre-enrollment, the program coordinator has already reviewed all the pre-enrollment documents that we've gathered, and they've written that initial plan, and they share it at the pre-enrollment to fill in the gaps based on what everybody else knows. And then at the enrollment, we share that plan with the person and their family. And then we have the 30-day, and that's when the goals get added in.
okay. Well, that's good to know. So what I'll do is I'll maybe just highlight these areas, and as we're doing our check-ins in the next few months, we can get a little bit more detail when we have more dedicated time. And so I'll maybe revise this a little bit to reflect what I'm hearing, and then we'll visit again about it in June. Does that sound good?
Julie,
Yes.
we didn't identify roles.
I was realizing that as we were talking probably for too long about this one. So knowing that the timekeeper now has to wrangle us back in a little bit, anyone willing to take that on?
This is Sharon. I can do it.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay. How about a recorder?
Hey, Julie, it's Tyler here. I'm doing the recording.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to send, so I have a document. I actually have a document open, so I'm going to send that to you right now. And if it is confusing to you, let me know and just take notes however you need to, and we'll plug it in later. Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Thanks. Okay. And then for someone to watch the chat box.
I can do that.
Thank you. Okay. So, all right, I will scroll down then to the, oh wait, do we have one more update on the agenda? I think we did. Oh, so we also have, let me scroll down to the medical section because we did get a decision on due process for psychoactive chemical intervention and meds for procedures. And so that was updated. I highlighted it here. So the expectation is that due process would occur. And we cited the several rules just to make sure that those, because again, kind of related to the bullet above. So although you might not need to maintain documentation of the physical, you may not have to do the self-medication administration assessment, but coordinating to make sure that the health and safety needs are met of the person and knowing what the medications are, what the dosages are, is required.
So even if the CSP is not doing anything to support the person medically, we are still required to have due process.
Yes.
How will
So-
you know?
The person lives at home with family. The family administers all meds and takes them to all
Mhm.
appointments. The CSP.
May never know what meds they take.
So because, and I don't want to go through each and every rule, but the way the rules are, so we're looking at, you know, that coordination of what the person's health needs are and knowing what medications they're on. So even if a CSP is not like administering the meds or helping manage the meds, knowing what the person is taking is really important. Knowing what side effects they might need to watch for is pretty important. And that all kind of ties in with those administrative rules and the due process. So, I mean, in order to really assure health and safety, the side effects, the benefit outweighing the risk, et cetera, like those kind of all fit together with assuring health and safety.
So what if they don't want to tell you and they're really private and, you know, do you just document that they don't want to tell you? I mean, I understand the safety that you're trying to address, but if they're managing their own medications anyway, we aren't going to have any control over any of that. And I'm not a community support provider, but I just am really trying to understand, like, how would we even explain that to someone?
Almost like we started to unbundle services, but rule didn't follow it.
So the discussion that we had, in my mind, even if services were, you know, we didn't have the rate mechanism we have, and, you know, we're obviously people have the option to opt out of the CSP managing that medical care. But at the same time, and honestly, I don't have a good answer for how to document that. I would need to think about that a little bit more. You know, when we discussed this, we definitely did talk about the other side. You know, it's a double-edged sword. We need to respect people's privacy, but at the same time, if you're providing direct supports to someone and they may be experiencing, you know, significant side effects, how do we balance that privacy with the health and safety? So, like I said, I don't have a great answer for you, but what I know is that it is based on our administrative rule as it is right now. We have to have that due process. And for psychoactive medications, that is for when the type of medication changes. So it's not like with every dosage change. Chemical interventions are those PRN meds or meds that don't have an associated mental health diagnosis, or the medication is being used for something that is not, you know, a seizure medication is being used to control behavior, for example, and then medications for sedation. So if those things are happening, we require due process to occur. So we can sure, if you have additional questions, you can send those to Jays and I, and we'll continue to work through that. So we have, I would see this as something that we're gonna need to dig into when we're providing training and preparing for the, rolling this out. Certainly, because there are lots of questions associated with this, but this is kind of the ground zero of this requirement.
Is there any conversation of changing ARSD?
We are reviewing rules. So the latest that we would have, we would be able to submit those. I think the last review, promulgation would happen, is it in November, Jays?
Yeah,
And we have to have those submitted 60 days ahead of time.
yes.
So we would need any suggestions. And of course, we'll have to prioritize what goes into each pack. We can't do everything at one time, but we would certainly take into consideration any recommendations you have.
I would think this would be a recommendation, as most of the time, a lot of this is always done after the fact. And so, like with our agency, the ones that we have always been after the fact, and sometimes it's 1 or 2 months later, and then it's, having to run that through the emergency approval process, which it's not really an emergency when you find out 2 months later. So just my thoughts.
Yeah, like I said, I think, if you have recommendations, it particularly, if you have a proposed alternative, that's always helpful when we're reviewing rules. It's hard to just repeal something like this. So we would need to have some alternative way that this would work, as well as probably, then of course it's always followed by how do we then implement and monitor compliance with that rule. But yeah, I think we would be open to, having that recommendation sent.
Could we make some wiggle room like we did with medical in general, where if the CSP is assisting the person with managing, their medical needs, then they would do this, and if they're not, then it's not required?
So go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and that was something that we did think about, but again, after our review of administrative rule, it was decided that there was not, we couldn't afford such flexibilities when it comes to these rules. Ultimately, I guess what it comes down to is understanding people have privacy and want to keep certain information confidential, and we understand the challenges, which is why if there are changes that need to be made in the future, we're certainly open to hearing those suggestions, but we have to interpret the rule as it's written now. And ultimately, to be a part of federal and state funded programs, there are regulatory requirements that people have to comply with. And so I know that's not always easy to explain, but there are certain things that come along with receiving federally funded services.
So I just find it a little confusing that we can, Naomi shared that form that they use. And so people can opt out of any medical assistance, but then we still want them to give us information.
That's opting out of receiving a service, like receiving nursing services, because those components are a requirement of receiving a nursing service. So essentially a participant is saying they don't want to receive nursing services from the CSP. These protections are not a part of a service. They're just fundamental requirements of health and safety and individuals' well-being.
So you could frame your thinking that the way rule states an individual has to have certain annual medical preventative. Here it talks about chemical interventions. The family's just opting out, saying, I don't want your help to do these things, but they should be doing those things. So you think about when you go to an annual meeting, now your medical staff will give a report of what medications people are taking and whatnot. Why couldn't the family report that at meetings? right? Because they still have to do those things. They're just choosing to not have us help them do those things.
Yeah. How realistic is that though, Cheryl? I
Well,
mean, let's
we
just,
unbundled it.
yeah.
This is Sharon, timekeeper. We may want to think about moving along. Almost
Yes.
9:30.
Thanks. Yes, Sharon, I was going to say, obviously there's a lot of thought and consideration that goes into this. So again, if you have ideas for how we could revise a rule, but we still protect the person's rights and make sure that their health and safety needs are met. Or if you have questions about just general questions about, well, how does this work in current reality? Certainly, like I said, send those to Jays and I, but yeah, for time's sake, let's move on to the significant change request section, which means I'm going to scroll. So hold on tight, hang on a second. Okay, so we invited Barb because she is part of the significant change request revision. And so the section on this particular for roles and responsibilities is not particularly long. So thoughts from your guys' review of this. And Barb, feel free to, if it would be helpful for you to maybe chime in and take a look at what we have outlined. So this middle column is the case management review. I realize the headers are getting a little messed up as we make edits. And then this right-hand column is the CSP responsibility.
Okay, so I am going to ask a question of clarification. In one column, it states that SCRs can be initiated by a participant or a case manager, and in the other, the CSP makes recommendations. So the CSP typically will be the lead then with all significant change requests?
Well, that is actually one thing I wanted to get clarification from you
Yes.
on. How has the SCR work group, how are you handling that? How will that be outlined as you prepare to roll it out?
We were going more over all that. So it would be a role, I mean, the case manager could, it's the language, SCRs can be initiated by a participant or a case manager. I guess we haven't really discussed who is the lead on it, but that it was a team. It needed to result in team consensus, team meeting about that. But we didn't identify that the CSP would, because how I'm reading it right now, it sounds like the CSP is always the lead on ensuring that these are being facilitated in most instances, unless there's something that the case manager has identified as needing a change or participant's family.
It really kind of depends on the provider. Some providers send you, a draft of the SCR with the changes, and other providers just send you an email and prefer that you write the SCR.
We mostly initiate most of all of the significant change requests with the CSP. The only ones that would be case management is maybe like ICAP changes, that type of stuff originates with them. The rest all originate with the CSP. Is
That's
that
how
right?
we do it as well.
Potentially the language be changed in that says SCR discussion or requests can be submitted to the CSP by the participant or a case manager. I mean, to me, it's still hazy as far as who is the lead on it. And if what I'm hearing is that the CSP is typically the lead, could we not word it such that it comes across that way? That's all I'm asking.
But it's different for every.
Okay.
So I think what it should say is anyone can initiate a conversation regarding a significant change. I think the end result that everybody is clear on is that the case manager is responsible for, collecting or, finalizing the SCR and submitting that to the state. A CSP, like some CSPs, they do it, they send it to the case manager. Case manager needs to review it, sign it, or have more discussion before they sign it, and then send it to the state. So the end result is anyone can initiate an SCR conversation, right? Or the process. But the case manager is responsible for finalizing and submitting to DHS.
So let me ask this, because I think, and I will leave the group members to agree or disagree with me, but it seems like it's been a bit confusing over the last few years, and sometimes frustrating because we're not quite sure. It sounds like there's a lot of inconsistency in which CSP and which, like, how the process works depending on which CSP and which services maybe, and who is asked. If it's a participant saying I have a job now, or I'm quitting my job, and I realize that we have to be flexible for different situations. But in an ideal state, what would the flow be? If we were like, I think what we're aiming for is consistency, because it would be nice, I think, for everyone, and reduce chaos if it was predictable and didn't depend on, these CSPs do it this way and these CSPs do it this way, and then these guys can go either way.
What I guess we think of this, of the SCR as a funding thing, which is the case manager's responsibility. So we'll give our case managers information, but we expect them to do the work of creating and getting the signatures of that form. That's what we do.
Okay, so what information do you share, Georgia, or how, like, can you give me an
We'll,
example?
we'll tell them that, this person shouldn't have other medical anymore because this has changed, or they do want to quit their job, or, their number of working hours has reduced. So we need to reduce that on the SCR.
Okay.
Those are easy ones, but the one that I think gets complicated, like, that's if the CSP shares the information, because one of the concerns was, and has been, is that we don't have access to the actual service, like the consumer service authorization, to make sure that we are putting the exact information down. I know that that's an ongoing conversation, but the tougher one is residential, because you have capacities and, other people are involved in that. So you can't break HIPAA. So that's the more challenging one. Obviously you can say this home has a capacity of 10, or this home has a capacity. But it's just I think that's why a lot of community support providers that I'm aware of have just kind of initiated that themselves, because they have that access at their fingertips versus, doing the legwork of sharing it with us. I don't care either way, really.
What Katie just
This
explained
is
is
Sharon, and we do it a lot like George's does it. We share that information with them, give them the numbers. And now a lot of that stuff is in the ISP for services. We had policy implementation and the financial review, and there was, a couple ISPs that had, older ISPs that had that missing, and then we had it updated. So a lot of that information's there, but we also communicate via email, SCOMs, back and forth with all of that information, and ask that the case managers initiate the SCR. Seems to work for us.
we do exactly what Katie was describing, and for that reason, because we hold that information. So instead of going back and forth a million times of capacity, who's there, whatnot, we start the form and then send it on to case management. Even doing that, we have our finance person following us all the time, wondering, where's the status? What does that look like? So there's still a huge communication influx, maybe you'd call it.
Well, and
I
at
would say
Lifescape, we do the
statewide.
same. We initiate by writing the SCR because we do have the information, and I agree that it's a funding issue, but from my perspective, the funding that it's affecting is the CSP funding, because case managers are getting billed, they're getting payment through case notes. The rates don't matter at all to case managers. So on the CSP side, I feel like we own that, and we want to make sure that it is 100% accurate, so we're getting reimbursed correctly.
I
I
second
would
what
say,
Amy said. Sorry.
can you guys hear me? Yes?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I would say statewide, the majority of people do the CSPs, exactly what Cheryl said and what Amy said. They kind of want to make sure that information is accurate, and it kind of seems to make sense because we don't have a lot of that. But then we also have the other agencies like Sharon, you talked about, that want us to do it. So, and we've done it both ways, but I would say it does work better if the CSP just initiates it for the most part.
So if I told you that by the time this group was concluding our work, that CSPs and case managers would be able to log in to a web-based system and see the hours and the services authorized for each person, does that change your answer?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not that we don't want to do it. We'll do it. We just don't have the information a lot of times.
So I guess I have a clarifying question, because what we tend to see or hear, or what happens is then when we have a question on the SCR, which is submitted by the case manager is unable to answer any questions, and ultimately kind of admits to us that they're just signing it. And so what to me seems to be missing is if the CSP determines that a change needs to happen and is initiating that, where is the team conversation happening related to those changes? Because that's the piece that, like, if we're talking about somebody is changing significant changes, like moving to a different home or ending day services or ending employment services, there should be a team discussion on a change like that should involve the case manager. So when we ask the case manager clarifying questions on the SCR, they should be able to answer those questions.
Not always. Not always.
How would a case manager, someone might move and a case manager wouldn't be part of that?
In the past, that has
happened.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. So yes, in the past, that's happened. I think we're better. I haven't heard any complaints about that recently, but in the past,
Or decisions are made where they're moving, and then they let us know where they're moving.
Yeah, so that's, how do we highlight that in this process, in that I mean, whoever writes the SCR, I'm not sure we're going to get too hung up on that, but how are we ensuring that there is a team consensus when, again, this significant changes are being made in an individual services?
I would say that that's one of the way that we make sure that we do let the case managers know, because they need to write the SCR. So of course, we're having to talk with them about it. I agree with the points that it's our funding, we're the people getting paid for it, and the case managers, they don't have that much skin in the game for that. But that's true in a lot of different pieces. That's true for the ICAP. That's just true in a lot of different situations. And so we just are really diligent about making sure that the case manager gets it right. And I think in that process, they learn more and they know about what's going on for people. So that would be my argument. And, I guess we gave up a lot of money to pay case managers. We'd like to see them do their part of the job and get skilled enough to do their part of the job. that's our perspective.
I would agree with you, Georgia. In our case, I mean, meetings are happening and these significant changes are discussed in there. And if it's a reduction of services, you know, forms are signed or obtained. So, I mean, if the case manager is not always aware, I guess I don't know that there's a lot a CSP can do about that, but
Okay,
I don't know.
so-
It's certainly meetings are held and discussed, and changes are discussed in those meetings. So I'm not
Okay,
sure.
so we'll take a look at this section and, you know, Tyler's taking notes, so we'll make some updates and, you know, provide those when we meet in a couple weeks. But for time's sake and knowing that we're gonna probably be cutting it pretty close, let's.
Julie, I'm sorry, and I know you're watching time, but as a part of the SCR work group, can I do a follow-up to Georgia quick? Georgia, when you're sharing this information with the case manager to submit, are you doing that in writing or verbally? Because I'm questioning if the pieces that you're asking for the change, if you're doing it in writing, could it not be the beginnings of the SCR document itself? And the reason I ask that is one of the things that wouldn't come up as a part of an individual team meeting is definitely the capacity. And that seems to be a huge issue because you could tell them the number's 10, but where the discussion needs to happen at the agency level is, if the capacity is at 10 and you only have 7 individuals there, you, the agency, are determining, do I want that facility kept at 10? Or have we identified that we want to change the capacity level? And again, that's not an individual team decision, that's an agency decision. And there's always lots of back and forth on that area on SCRs that I review. And the case manager wouldn't be privy to that discussion. So just wondering, when you're sharing, are you doing it verbally or could it be via those certain sections of the SCR?
It's typically in writing and then verbal follow-up if we need to.
So
Share it.
is that something that the writing part could be the completion of those sections of the SCR?
Yeah, that's what the case managers do very often is they'll cut and paste what we wrote and they'll put it in the SCR. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna slide on over to discharges and terminations. Thank you, Barb.
Can I add one last thing? When the case manager submits to the division, the SCR, can we include on here that they should be copying the CSP so the CSP knows when it actually got submitted?
Yes, Tyler, will you make sure you add that to the notes? I know that's been a conversation in the past. Okay, so moving on to discharges and terminations. And if you have other thoughts, you know, feel free to send those along to Jay's and I, and we'll, you know, review as we make updates to the document. Okay, so again, this is a pretty concise section, only a few bullet points under each. DDD is very cognizant that there are some challenges with the current process. So what are your guys' thoughts for recommendations as far as roles and responsibilities go?
This is Sharon. I would say, so is there a plan to update this with the issues that you mentioned, Julie?
Yes, so our hope is that as the SCR work wraps up, then we can move on to the discharge and termination.
Okay. All right.
And one question I have is, would it be helpful knowing that discharges and terminations, I mean, we use the same looking forms, but there are different requirements. Would it be helpful to have these in 2 different sections?
Like a discharge section and a termination section?
Yeah, would that be helpful? Because it seems like we have a lot of things in parentheses that says like, when this is happening, you know, do this. And
Yeah,
I'm wondering if it would just be easier to separate the two.
You know what? I do think that would be a good idea.
Okay.
And then I have ideas on the form changes too, but that's a different meeting.
Yeah, that's probably.
I have a lot of input on this area.
Okay.
Rule says, I mean, rule doesn't say discharge and termination anymore. If we're gonna use consistent language with rule, I mean, it's participant discontinuation
Yep.
and CSP. So maybe we want two separate because they are two separate expectations with timelines. Yes, I agree.
And we can use the same language that's in rule for consistency as well.
Yeah, because I mean, we still call it termination and discharge in our, when we talk about them. So it probably is pretty confusing for some.
Mhm. Other thoughts?
I was wondering if we could add in responsibilities for like notice of reduction or sending out the DD 717, the participant information and storage access document. This is the only area that requires the 717. So if that could be included for, I mean, on the CSP side,
The 717.
the DD 7 provider choice and service choice notice.
Repeat that for the record.
Discharge?
Yeah, I don't see that in this section, Amy.
It's not here. That's what I'm saying, if it could be added, because on that participant information and storage access document that the division created, that is the one and only time that the CSP is required to have that DD 717 form.
But what does that have to do with discharge and termination? I'm confused too.
Because you have to, if you have terminated or discharged, you have to document how you have provided that information of the other providers and their services and their right to appeal and all of that. And that's done through the 717 form.
Oh, we don't use the 717 form to share that type of information. We do that I mean, we just have a conversation. So we haven't used the 717 to cover that when we answer that question.
Yeah. Well, I know that's been a source of confusion on my side anyway, because that is when it's required on the CSP side. We're not required to get it annually at ISPs, but we are required to have one on hand for a discharge or termination.
So I mean, I wasn't following, but I think I am now, but so with the terminate, so what I think I'm hearing you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think I'm following, but you know, is when Lifescape is initiating termination, that you have to provide alternative services and, you know, provider options, right? So you are demonstrating that by giving the person the 717 form and having them sign that they got that information.
Well, what I'm saying is your guys's document, the participant information and storage access document, requires us to do that.
For discharges? I'll have to look back at that.
the fair hearing notice. Is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
It goes in your ISP
hearing
log.
notice. That's for reduction of services, which is a whole other, it's a whole other process
Yes.
outside of
but it-
discharge and termination.
The form, the 717, whatever says if you terminate or reduce their services.
Okay.
Oh, I think maybe and I can't speak to what that their guide says. We'd have to look into that. We require that information to be shared. I don't know, and again, not being familiar with that storage document for their app, That notification doesn't have to be done through a 717. It's just if that's, I guess, the way that you choose to provide that notification, then that can be acceptable. But I don't know that it's, I know particularly in waiver that 717 document is only associated with the initial level of care and then ongoing from that point on. So I guess the 717 could be used as a tool in a reduction or discharge termination situation, but I don't think that it has to be used.
Yeah, and we'll definitely verify that participant information document that you mentioned, Amy, and we'll make a correction to that or clarify in that if needed as well.
Yeah, I'm fine with it just being a notice of reduction of services, because that is generally what we do. It's just that document has always confused me because it's listing the 717 and then it says the CSP in the CSP column. That's the only time we're required to have it.
Yeah, okay, we'll double check that. Okay, so in the spirit of time, again, we had really good conversation today, but that usually means that we're running short on time. So if you have other suggestions for this section, please send those. I would say no later than like the end of the day on Monday. And then we can get the updates made and get things turned back around before our next meeting, which will be on May 26th. If my math is good, which sometimes it's not. So May 26th, we'll meet at the same time, and our topic next time. So we'll look at updates on these two sections. It will actually equate to 3 sections as we separate discharge and termination. And then we will focus on Human Rights Committee and Behavior Support Committee and emergency restrictions. I'm just going to throw this out there. It is possible that we're going to have some hearty discussion on those as well. And so, just to be aware that if there are specific questions or recommendations we have, that we are ready for those, and we kind of stay flexible if we need to move one of those sections to a future agenda. So other things that we need to, what are we expected to do before we meet again, Tyler? I think the list is kind of long today.
Let me review my notes. Well, we definitely need some, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a little fuzzy, but
Sorry.
sound far.
It looks like we need some clarification on that 717 form, when it's needed to be utilized. We also need some, it looks like more clarification on the significant change request process. I'm not sure that we hammered down anything yet, but it looks like perhaps it might be CSP initiated and belong there, but we need further clarification on that. That's what I have so far.
Okay. All right, so we'll get the meeting notes updated. Those have been put on the provider portal. So each time I'm just replacing the meeting notes document because we're continuing to add to the same one, and it'll have the most recent date on it. And as we get these updates made, then we're posting that on the provider portal as well. And I believe I have the meeting recording from last time out there. So again, any administrative, Tyler, did you mention administrative rule recommendations to be sent as an action item?
Yes, that's correct. We do need that as soon as, obviously as soon as possible. I think you stated by November.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. All right. Anything else, knowing that we have just a couple minutes left?
This is Barb, and just real quick, if I did pull up, and I think this is the document that I think it was Amy was alluding to, participant information storage and access therapy table. And it is the fair hearing notice that If there is a termination or reduction of services, that would be provided, and that is for the DSP. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes,
Yes,
I'm
that's
looking,
what I'm referring to.
I'm
And
looking at
it's for fair
that.
hearing notice, not the provider choice, service choice notice.
But one side of that DD 717 form says it's the fair hearing notice.
So Amy, how I'm reading that, and I just opened it too, how I'm reading it is that it still falls in the reduction of service rather than we're terminating all services. So if a service is being ended, so day services goes from 40 hours to 0 hours, or day services goes from 40 hours to 20 hours, it's a termination of a service or a reduction of a service versus a complete provider termination. Does that make sense? But we could probably, I can see how you would have interpreted it that way. So
And that is only when a CSP is initiating that reduction, that it doesn't need to be completed if the person supported is saying, I'm not coming there
Correct.
anymore.
That's correct.
Right? Okay.
Okay.
I
right.
just had one more thing, if we have just a little time, with the discharge and the termination paperwork. My thing is, it seems like a repeat of work when the CSP and the conflict-free have to provide the paperwork for the same thing. A lot of times it's copy and paste from one organization. So if we could look at that doesn't make
that's
sense.
definitely will be part of that process review, because it's, on the receiving end, it is confusing in the way the forms are presented because both providers are signing each form. It's hard to tell where they originated, but knowing that there are different services being provided by case management versus, the CSP, obviously. And so we do, if the person is leaving all services, we need to have the notice and the notice and summary from each provider. But, the last time we revised those, having the signatures, just there's not enough distinction about where the form is originating once we get it at the end. And I definitely see the perspective of it seems duplicative. So that'll definitely be part of the conversation. But it may, that may be something that would need to happen through rule, because of the way rule is written. It says the provider sends, and that means both. So, but yeah, that's totally agree. It's a lot of paper to shuffle around. So
another comment I have about those forms is there's a lot of information due on the termination or the discharge notice, which a lot of times, unfortunately, we maybe hear about it that day, and then we're trying to collect all that information and get it submitted, which is challenging. And then on the summary side, there's just not that much information. So if there could be less information required on the notice and push to the summary, that could be really helpful. It's quite a task to get all of that done when you're in the midst of everything else, and that form has to be submitted in such a timely way that that's challenging.
And that's how it used to be the opposite way, just as Georgia is saying, prior to this last update a few years ago.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, so what we'll hopefully be able to do is, and I know that there was a question last time we met about the SCR work wrapping up. And so we are getting closer to having those definitions cleaned up. And I think that's one of the last pieces, if not the last piece, before training can occur, and that procedure be rolled out. So just wanted to give a quick little update on that as well. But I see we are a minute over time, so I want to be respectful of everybody's busy schedules, and we'll get these documents updated. And if it worked for everybody, I will just attach the updates to the next meeting invite, and update that as we prepare for the next one. Everyone have a great rest of the week and weekend, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
You.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.